He said, yeah, it's nice, but it's nowhere near as nice as this. So, it's Jag time again. I think when we last covered it, Stu was making these bulkhead sections and the so-called Napoleon's hat that fills the middle there. So as you can see, that's now done. That completes that air intake ducting for the heater unit, and obviously fills in the rest of the bulkhead there. Obvious difference at the minute is we've got the engine and gearbox slung in place. They're not actually mounted at the minute. But that went really well. We've sculpted out the chassis legs down there a little bit for clearance on the alternator and the air conditioning compressor. They just cleared, but it was a fag paper, and we wanted to make sure obviously there's room for the engine to move when it's in use. So we've sculpted out some sections there, which we'll finish welding in once we've taken the engine back out again. We've put a different sump on. The sump bowl on that car was right at the front of the engine and fouled the cross member. But there was a different sump pan available for a different Lexus, and I think it was something like a CS 300, a different Lexus model anyway, where the sump bowl is more like in the middle of the engine, and we got one of those, and that is just a perfect fit. It sits exactly where we want it to sit, gives us room for the steering rack to go across. So that's all gone really nicely, and it just sits lovely in there. So you can see now we've slung this in, how big a difference there is in size between the Jag engine and this Lexus engine, which normally is quite a large looking engine, but in this engine bay it looks remarkably small. We haven't quite finished the engine mounts yet because we want to actually get the steering rack fitted before we totally finalise the position, because we're not 100% sure what position front and back it will go. We want to get the rack in there basically and then put it as far forward as it can go, so we've got as much room at the back as we can have. The steering rack will be a later Jag rack because these were originally steering box, not rack and pinion. So we're going to be making some custom mounts and fitting a steering rack from a Jag sort of XJ40 or late XJS steering rack. And that's going to then have custom track rods to make sure we've got the right length track rods basically. So yeah, we've got engine dropped in, that all went pleasingly. Obviously to facilitate that we had to chop out a big chunk inside the car. So, as you can see, the transmission tunnel is complete. That all fitted quite nicely as well. The gearbox, we've shortened the shifter mechanism on the gearbox, but it was in the realms of just being able to shorten the standard linkage on the BMW box to keep it in front of this cross member, which was good. We were hoping we weren't going to have to totally refabricate that further back. And the shift position is in a great position there, so that's all worked out pretty well. You can see at the top section there on this is where our air conditioning and heater pipes are going to come through to the heater box here. This, as we talked about before, is just a sort of vacuum formed dummy unit, but we have now done the mounts for that. And we've also done, as you can see along here, various mounts with threaded inserts in to give us options when we're routing wiring behind here. And we've also done a mounting panel up there. We've done the brackets welded to the bulkhead and made a panel that will be kind of where we mount our engine ECU and the PDU that will control the electronics in the car. The reason for doing that now really is that we don't want to be drilling holes through the bulkhead and have bolt heads showing on the engine bay side of it. So by welding brackets in now with threaded inserts in them, we can just bolt everything on later without any visible fasteners on the outside of the bulkhead. We've moved the wiper motor. It's the original Lucas type wiper motor, which essentially has a tube with a rack that runs inside it and moves back and forth that turns the spindles. Normally that routes through into the engine bay and the motor's mounted in the engine bay, but for cosmetic reasons, and to be honest, for reliability as well, we'd prefer it to be inside the car. So that's now been mounted down on this side of the bulkhead. Still pretty accessible, but just keeps it away from the elements and keeps the engine bay looking a bit neater. I think last time we had the pedal box and I was talking about how we were mounting it, but that's now in. We're happy with the pedal positions. The section of bulkhead that's on is complete. We've just got to finish the last infill sections between this tunnel and the new sections of bulkhead that the pedal box is mounted to. They need completing. We've done the lower part of the bulkhead on this side. We've dropped that down intentionally quite low to clear where the throttle bodies will be on the engine, which actually is another avenue of progress we're working on at the moment. Before we finalise the inner wing fabrication, we're going to get the throttle bodies mounted. So we're currently drawing up the inlet manifold that will make our throttle bodies to this engine, which will eventually get made machined from solid billet aluminium. But for the sake of mocking up the throttle bodies, we're going to 3D print that manifold, so we can literally get the throttle bodies bolted in and do the fabrication to the inner wing. But in terms of the fabrication in here, pretty much there. The only things left to do will be any fabrication work for the dash, and we're currently doing the interior design work to finalise how it's going to look in here, which will then allow us to do the metalwork accordingly. So we're kind of at the point we can get to at the minute here. So we'll have a look at the outside and see the rear end metalwork, which is the biggie we've been looking forward to showing off. This is the bit that we were all kind of excited to see take shape, and we're really happy with the results. I think last time we were just making the boot lid, so that's just a smooth aluminium panel that we handmade. But yeah, the major change is essentially everything from kind of that line down is new metalwork. And this is where Stu, our kind of chief metalwork guy, really comes into his own, in that we didn't have a 3D model of this. We had the artist impression that we did, and literally we could just give him that, and without making a male mould first of this shape, he literally just free-handed one side of the whole rear end, and then once we were happy with that, literally take profiles from that side to make sure the other side was made the same, and yeah, so pretty much just made it based on the drawing. Obviously a lot of English wheel work around to get these compound curves in these flanks here. There's going to be some just small red, fairly classic looking LED lights that sit into here. And when we've finished sort of finessing all the bodywork, we're going to have this rear shape here 3D scanned, so we can then from that scan data build a CAD model of a bezel which will sit around here, which will be then just billet machined and chromed or polished to sit around those rear lights. There'll be a bumper, which again, the easiest way, especially as there's the chance with a bumper of it getting scraped, it would be nice if they weren't one-off handmade in sheet metal, because you've got to do that again every time. So what we're going to do is we're going to scan this shape of the car here and basically draw a CAD model of this slim bumper blade, which will also likely be either 3D printed or machined in solid billet. And the benefit of that is if it does get damaged, then we can just get another one made. We've already done the hard work in the drawing, so it's not hours and hours of labour again. So there's a mount you can see there's a hole here which actually leads through to a big crush tube behind there, which goes through the original inner rear panel structure and will allow us to bolt into a thread which will literally drill and tap into the back of the bumper. And at the side here, this is just a double skin steel here anyway, so we'll drill another hole here which will be the other mounting point for the bumper. This is where the number plates are going to go, of course. We'll have some discrete sort of LED lights in there to light that up. there's a slight, subtle sort of upwards cut in the back there, which just breaks the shape up a little bit, which works really well. That was one of the sort of almost subtler details in the original drawing, but it does just break it up a little bit, because there's the danger with such a big expanse of it looking too much of a smooth expanse, and there'll be a badge on here which breaks up the sort of expanse of metal on the back there. We've done the exhaust cutout, which is down there. We've done that side because that's the side the exhaust is on the Toyota engine, and then to balance that sort of cosmetically, we've done the fuel filler this side, and that's going to be like a classic Monza type sort of chrome pop-up fuel cap, but to sort of fit in with the streamliner sort of look that we've been going for, and just make it look a little more like it grew there. We've made a little recess here that'll sit into. Partially it'll be sort of half in it, half outside it, and there's a few details to get right on that as well. It has to be big enough that when you open the cap, the hinged part of the cap doesn't quite hit the edge of here, and also we've done a water drain because of course this is downward recessed here. It would fill up with water to this point, which would be high enough that when you open the cap you'd get water in your fuel. So we've done a little drain hole in the corner here with a tube brazed on the underside of there, which we'll have a pipe on there that just leads out somewhere under the car. The main remaining bit of sheet metal is the wheel covers that will go on here. If you remember from the drawings, we're making these fully enclosed rear wheels, but rather than just a flat, smooth cover like you'd get on a Mark 1 Jag, we're trying to break that up a bit. So we're doing this cover that flares out slightly and then has a swage line around here that kind of tapers out as the body expands out. So essentially it's on the outer face is on a flat plane, and because the body curves in, the swage where this angle meets this vertical face will taper out as you come further down the body. So you'll have a tapering out sort of flare around the arch here, which will probably taper out slightly higher on the front than it does at the back because of the shape of the body. So kind of excited to see what they're going to look like. I think we might do a quick rough out, maybe in steel to start with on one of them, just to make sure we're happy with the shape, but they're going to be aluminium. The final covers are aluminium. Stu's just making the framework that will support them at the moment, but they're going to fit in the original fashion, which is a pin at the back here, two little tabs. I think originally it was just one, but we're going to do two little tabs at the back that sit against here. They were metal on metal originally. We're going to do like a nylon buffer in there, and then in the door shut area there's a pair of little quarter turn Zeus fasteners, which will be the sort of bit that you undo. So you undo those two, and then the whole panel comes out. Which is much like the original covers were, just a slightly better executed from the point of view of not having any metal on metal or paint on paint contact anywhere. And then there's a little work to do on the mechanical side of things. The axle we're going to be locating in a different way to original. It used to be a trailing leaf, so you've essentially got half of a traditional leaf spring. The front of it is clamped to the body shell, and the axle sits on the rear end of that semi-leaf. And then has a small link at the top to control the rotation of the axle. We're getting rid of that completely on this. We're going to have a multi-link setup, so it'll be a 5-link essentially, 4 trailing arms and a panhard rod to give you all of the location of the axle, and then the springing. Our plan at the moment, as it stands, is coilovers into a reinforced version of the original turret. So that will give us easy adjustability of spring rates and ride height as well. So that's a little bit of sort of mechanical fabrication work to do on the shell. The next steps really at that point are getting the engine completely mounted, which is waiting for the steering rack. finishing the interior design so we can do all the metalwork on the dash structure there, and then going over and doing all the finessing work, basically any lead work, any just tweaking of any shapes that aren't 100% perfect at the minute. And with that lot done, you know, we'll be getting there. So I'm kind of excited to push it through these final stages of metalwork, because I think I speak for everyone here when I say that we can't wait to see this thing in paint, because the shape of it is just it's so gorgeous, all the different subtle curves in it, the way the light's going to flow over it, it's just going to look amazing. So really excited about that.
Has there been any difficulties?
No, not so far, no. I think obviously none of the metalwork is easy, but it's gone as well as we hoped it would, and it's certainly looking, I mean, the main thing is you run the danger always with these things that you do all the work and then you're not happy with the result. But yeah, we're all over the moon. It looks exactly as it does in the drawings, and the drawings look great, so I'm really happy with that. The engine and gearbox fit went as well as we could expect. I mean, there's another area where you could get to the point where there is no off-the-shelf sump. Maybe you have to engineer your own sump pan. There's always the risk that the oil pickup pipe comes out in a point where the crossmember is, and you have to totally re-engineer the way the oil pump works. And none of that's been a problem, so that's great. So yeah, I mean, I guess I like to think we plan these things reasonably well based on experience, but there's always the risk of something we've overlooked. But certainly so far, there's not been any major traumas, shall we say. It's all gone reasonably smoothly, so yeah, good.
How's the customer feeling? Has any favourite bits?
He hasn't been over since he sat in it, which I talked about before. He's got a planned visit in, I think, 2 weeks, well, just less than 2 weeks. We're going to be finishing our interior design work next week, and then he's coming over to basically look at that design proposal, say yes or no, or suggest any changes that he wants, and have a look at the car. But yeah, he seems very excited about and happy with the shape of it. The main giveaway was I sent him the video to Chip Foose's E-Type unveiling at SEMA, which I was actually there in person and sent him my video of the unveil, and he said yeah, it's nice, but it's nowhere near as nice as this. So that was good. You know, he's clearly happy with it. I'm sure he will be happy when he sees it in person as well. So, you know, usually if we're happy with it, the customer's happy with it. So, and we're certainly happy with it.
Any favourite YouTube comments?
Moobs. I can't remember any of the others because that one was the one that made me laugh so much. Yeah, to be fair, it's kind of gone the way it usually does with these things, in that you initially attract quite a lot of negative comment, and then as the project progresses, that becomes less and less because your reasoning for everything becomes more apparent. And in the early stages, people kind of assume that it's going to go the way a lot of car projects go, where there's all massive hype at the start and then it kind of fizzles out, and people can't achieve the product that they talked about. They bigged up of something they weren't able to achieve. Whereas I'm hoping that the products that we achieve are in line with the hype that we create about them, which is relatively minimal. So you tend to find that as the projects go along in the video, the negative comments get less because people realise that, yeah, actually this has been done pretty nicely. That's what I like to think anyway. I'm sure there'll still be loads of negative comments, especially if we put this footage on there. Cool, that was like, I virtually didn't pause for breath in that entire thing.